This is super interesting because I jokingly said this at first, but as we know, every great joke's got a hint of truth in it, which was, is it really debt if they have no plan to ever pay it back? Right. And kind of what we've seen is a just an absolute expansion. I think we're at 75% expansion of the Fed's balance sheet over the last kind of 3.5 months. And if they were to put it through this latest rumored proposal of another $1 trillion kind of infrastructure package or whatever it is, we'd essentially see 100% growth in a 12-month period of the Fed's balance sheet. So kind of, is it actually dead, or how do you think about that balance sheet and kind of the deficit that just seems to literally just in 2020, every time I see an estimation as to what the final deficit for the year is going to be, it's just getting bigger and bigger and literally in some cases has already doubled from where they thought they were going to be at the beginning of the year to now where they think they're going to end up.
Yeah. So first, every time that I hear a new $1 trillion stimulus be announced, I immediately buy Bitcoin. That's my new trigger, and I seemingly get to buy Bitcoin every week. So, no, I do think so. Realistically, and I think you keyed in on something really important, because if I had the opportunity if I was sitting before Congress or a member of Congress and I had Chairman Powell sitting in front of me, I would ask him one question, and it is, did you or did you not monetize the debt of the United States? Because the answer is clearly yes. And this is something that in my work, going back and reading the transcripts from past Fed meetings from after the financial crisis in and around 2011, I believe it was Richard Fisher, who was the Dallas Fed president. He basically, I can't quote it verbatim, but he made a comment that was along the lines of, we need to take the key, lock the door, and throw it away on the idea that we will ever again monetize the debt of our federal government. And there were a lot of responses that basically said, well, we're not monetizing the debt. This is just temporary. Of course, Ben Bernanke's gotten on 60 Minutes and said, and we can remove the accommodation, when we need to. And I think there's two problems with it. The first fact is that it's just not true. It's false. They may believe it to be true, but if they believe it to be true, then they don't understand the consequences of their actions. And what I mean by that is, if I have my very simplistic wheel, there's too much debt, not enough dollars. Through QE, the Fed adds more dollars, that creates more debt, and then you get into a world where you have too much debt again. And that's why each time, we look at one of these crises, the Fed is going to have to put more dollars in to sustain the credit system, because the credit system is now larger as a function of QE. It's a vicious cycle. And so I think the short answer is yes, we are monetizing debt. The longer term question or consequence is, how long can that continue? Because you have a bunch of children who are modern monetary theorists that have begun to think that something that doesn't make any fundamental economic sense can go on forever. And rather than spend the time to actually understand a fundamental economic first principle, to say, okay, if money doesn't grow on trees and that you can't just print money, then just because I create more degrees of separation and put it at the Federal Reserve level, that it suddenly makes sense. Or if that doesn't make sense on an individual level, on an individual balance sheet level, on a company's balance sheet level, then, it makes sense at a federal level because the Fed has this magic power. And you say, is it really a magic power? Or is there something else that I'm missing that is causing this system to continue to be stood up in the interim? But maybe, just maybe, there's something very naturally that causes that to break. And so, when I think about debt monetization, the answer is yes, they're monetizing debt. I define that as, after the end of QE3, the Fed's balance sheet was 4.5 trillion. And I wrote about this in Ender's Game, which said then, again, could have been COVID, could have been the next crisis inducing financial collapse, but that future QE was an inevitability because of the degree of system leverage. And so when the Fed began to unwind the balance sheet in 2017, in the fall of 2017, they basically slowly took out 700 billion. So they had added 3.6 trillion through the process of QE 1, 2, and 3. And the definition of if it were truly just temporary would have been that they had taken out all of the 3.6 trillion. They didn't even get halfway through QE3 before the repo market broke in September. And then even before COVID, they added 500 billion. So they basically put back in approximately 75% to 80% of what they had taken out. And now that we're elevated well above 4.5 trillion, which is where the balance sheet stood after QE3, it is, yes, they monetize the debt. They can never get their balance sheet below 4.5 trillion again, because those dollars are all needed to support an even more levered financial system. And so if I describe putting dollars in one sense as deleveraging the system, basically you've got debt as the numerator and dollars as the denominator. If you put more dollars in the denominator, you're deleveraging. But if you're taking those dollars back out and essentially, reversing the fact that you've monetized debt, then you have the exact same amount of debt in the world and you have fewer dollars to service them. So you're actually relevering the economy as a function of that operation. And eventually it breaks and you have to put them back in. So I think that there's a reality that while that is true, the amount of debt in the system and the degree of leverage actually keeps the system, it's a precarious balance, but it actually keeps the system together and causes it to break at the same time. And what I mean by that is that it's actually the high degrees of leverage that create demand for dollars. So that you can put $3.6 trillion in after QE and still have a world where the dollar generally holds its purchasing power because so many people are short them. And in many respects, the same dynamic exists today. Before March came around, there was 75 trillion of debt, 2 trillion of dollars. So if you put $3 trillion in the system from March to today, you're still at a position where each dollar is owed 15 times. And people are constantly having to demand dollars, and that's allowing the dollar, despite the fact that a massive amount of dollars are being created, that is what causes the dollar to hold its value, because so many people are short of them and so many people need them. Now, effectively and ultimately over time, you will get into a situation where that the amount of dollars that they have to continue to supply into the system becomes less and less scarce relative to the amount of debt. And all while people are opting out and going to Bitcoin. And as people are opting over to Bitcoin, the marginal demand for dollars becomes weakened or lesser and lesser over time. And once a critical mass of people, or once the density gets high enough in the Bitcoin world of people holding Bitcoin, and you don't have as many people constantly demanding dollars, that's when this cycle of QE ultimately breaks down, where they can't continue to do it because the dollar, while they're doing it, doesn't maintain its value.